Welcome again to the second video. Now I would like to give you an outline of the whole book. And the idea now for me is to give you a clear idea of how Dagpo Tashi Namgyal structured his teaching. Some of you might be of the spontaneous kind, not liking structures, but actually to know the structure or underlying a teaching helps enormously to understand the teaching. So when I explain this to you now, I base myself again, of course, on this book. And Elizabeth Callahan gives in her introduction on the pages 42 to 57, she gives a summary of each chapter. That could be very helpful to you and will be an object of study now, after listening to this video. And I will be following the outline of text in the beginning, actually the list of the table of contents. Of course, only for the Moonbeams of Mahamudra, not for the second text here, clarifying, what is it called? Dispelling the darkness of ignorance by the ninth Karmapa, which is also included in this big book. Now, let's try to understand how Dagpo Tashi Namgyal set out his writing. There are three parts to the book: the introduction, the main part, and the colophon. So this is actually just like the frame. The introduction is very short, the colophon is very short, then we have the main part of the book. In the introduction, the idea which Dagpo Tashi Namgyal had in mind is to tell us why we meditate on the nature of mind. Why is it necessary to be instructed in the nature of mind, and what actually happens if you don't do it? To put it shortly, what we call samsara and nirvana, life in bondage and life in freedom, all happens in mind. All phenomena are experienced in mind. All experience is actually a mental experience. If one does not understand mind, if one does not master the mind, one will not become free. The basic problem of not meditating on the nature of mind is that one will waste one's time. One might be able to calm one's mind and enter even samadhis, deep absorptions, but one is not liberated. These temporary states of mental calm do not create the fundamental change in one's perception, in one's way of being, of seeing, of experiencing, that is necessary to be an awakened being, to be completely free. And if one uses every situation, every life experience to meditate the nature of mind, to look into it, to investigate into it, and then to open up into it, and to stay in it, then actually freedom is assured, because one sees through the illusions of stability, one sees through the illusions of self, One sees through the illusion of independent existence and understands that everything is process, there is no center to the experience, and that actually life is completely interdependent. There are no independently existing entities like a soul or me, a subject or a thing, an object. So that is his short introduction. He makes these points clear. All phenomena are experienced in mind. There are lots of problems if one is not meditating on the nature of mind, and great virtues of meditating on the nature of mind. Basically what he does in this introduction, he takes care of the motivation. He explains to us the underlying meaning of the book, of the whole teaching, of all actually the activities of all the awakened masters. What motivates them to spread the Dharma? The Dharma is always about understanding, change, process like nature, impermanence. It is always about showing us that not knowing life, not knowing the mind, that there is a lot of stress, suffering, a lot of tension arising in mind called dukkha in the old teachings. And that the understanding of non-self, of non-solidity, of interdependence is actually the key to awakening. So that's the Dharma for all traditions. And Mahamudra practice, you could say, has simply specialized on the most essential of the essence. It's like this. This is how you can describe it. Now, the main part of the teaching then, the main part of the book, focuses on how we meditate on the nature of mind, the way we meditate on it. And it falls in two sections, this main explanations. I find this is very skillful what Dagpo Tashi Namgyal does. He says, first, let's look at what is common to all Buddhist traditions, the common approach to meditating on the nature of mind. Shamatha and Vipassana, mental calm and insight. So, in this section, on the common meditation approach, which is part 1 of the book, he first establishes Shamatha and Vipassana as the key terms and the key practices of meditation, mental calm and intuitive insight. Then he goes in the second chapter into the explanations how one cultivates shamatha, mental calm. In the third chapter, how one commonly cultivates vipassana, insight. And then how, commonly in all traditions, one meditates on the view, on this or in this understanding that is arising. And this understanding of the view, which means to see with the eyes of the Buddha, that's called view here. To perceive with the eyes of the Buddha. It's not an intellectual view. It's not a philosophical standpoint. It is seeing with less and less veils. And in this chapter, actually, he talks about removing doubts, removing questions that we have about the mind, about life, how it works. So with this first section, everyone well instructed in any meditation tradition that we have nowadays as well on this planet, then would find the common points. For example, myself, who has also started in the Theravadan tradition, then I find so many familiar points there. And although in some Zen monasteries there are very few instructions given, you also find basic understanding of that approach to meditation. Although Zen is very much a pointing out tradition, very much an essentialized tradition. So everyone who has been trained finds common ground. And there are no discrepancies there. And Dagpo Tashi Namgyal shows that he is very aware of what is the common ground. And then he devotes the second part of the main teaching in the book to the particular Mahamudra approach. This is the so-called part 2 in the book. The part 2 is what is most interesting to us, wanting to learn Mahamudra, but we should not dispense of the basics, the preliminaries of the common explanations. We need to know that, because what is very interesting is to see, well, that's common to all schools. Now what is not common? What is the uncommon, the particular approach in addition? What is the additional aspect of Mahamudra? And you could imagine another author sitting down and saying, well, I come from the Dzogchen tradition. So yes, I agree with Dagpo Tashi Namgyal, this is the common meditation instruction. What is the particular approach of Dzogchen? What is the particular approach of Zen? What is the particular approach of Gelug Mahamudra? What is, we have this common ground of understanding, and here someone sits down and then explains what is in addition. And for me as a meditation teacher, I see that depending on the student who is in front of me, sometimes I have to go into the common ground of all traditions. That's what I teach. It's not actually the time to give very specific Mahamudra instructions. And at other times, the student needs specific Mahamudra instructions to overcome an obstacle in practice which is easier resolved with this kind of instruction. It is very, very helpful to know when one moves on common ground and when one moves in the area of pointing out essential instructions which finally do not rely on a separation of practice into Shamatha and Vipassana. Actually, this is an artificial separation. And already at the end of the common meditation approach, then Dagpo Tashi Namgyal points out how Shamatha and Vipassana are practiced together. In this section, he also distinguishes two approaches to meditation on the inside, on view. One which he calls analytical meditation, and one which he calls resting meditation, settling. And he explains the roles of the analytical approach and settling into the arising insight. And he dispels some misunderstandings about how far analysis can take one, and how far just resting meditation can take one. And he prepares the ground that we understand that practicing Mahamudra is resting in the insight, in the view. Analysis uses the intellect, uses discriminating wisdom, a capacity to look and to understand, to differentiate, and that understanding opens a space, a non-conceptual space. And then we need the capacity to just settle in that. It's a different settling than the resting, which is with an observer, which is with a dualistic reference point, a meditation object. These resting meditations with reference points, they do not lead beyond samsara. And to continue with analytical meditation when the mind has already opened into the non-conceptual state, into the dimension of seeing, then to continue with analytical meditation would be wrong. We would re-engage in dualistic processes. So, as we go through the first 4 chapters, we come to an understanding. Shamatha and Vipassana are both necessary, and they go best when they are combined. When we use the mental calm with its resulting clarity to investigate the mind, we can help the investigation with some degree of analytical approach. And then again we let go of the analytical approach and rest in the understanding, which to some could look as if we were doing shamatha. But actually it's shamatha without reference point and without a center. It's the letting go into the natural openness of mind. So he prepares the ground for the more structured, general explanation of Mahamudra. In the 5th chapter, and I will go there now to explain a little bit more in a few things in detail, he talks about generating confidence. It's on page 113 in the book. It starts there. And the idea here of Dagpo Tashi Namgyal in this chapter is that he shows that Mahamudra as an approach is established since a long time in the Indian tradition, and that it receives mentions in sutras, so teachings by the Buddha in the Mahayana sutras, as well as in the tantras, where the Buddha manifests in different forms. And he establishes a basic understanding of what is the essence of Mahamudra, which is explained here as not abiding anywhere, being free from all characteristics, pervading everything like space. And then how you can talk about Mahamudra, differentiate Mahamudra, ground, path, and fruit Mahamudra. And he goes through this whole explanation giving a lot of quotes. It is a necessary part of this book that a lot of quotations are given from the source texts. Because one of the aims of this book is to show that none of this is an invention of Gampopa, nor of anyone after him. So to provide an enormous amount of quotes for every statement that he is making. To underline that. That was good custom in Tibet, and it should be good custom nowadays, but we are not learned enough to be able to quote so abundantly. And he introduces the reader in this 5th chapter gradually into an understanding of what Mahamudra is, using these quotes, definitions of the word Mahamudra, talking about the ground Mahamudra, the basic nature of mind present in everyone, the path Mahamudra, which unveils this basic nature of mind, this basic Buddha nature, and the fruit Mahamudra, which is this basic nature becoming completely manifest. And without talking so precisely about it, the confidence that is created in this chapter is that everyone actually has that nature of mind. And that all teachers encourage us to practice with that confidence that we can be awakened ourselves. And that you should have no doubt that that is our basic nature. And now the rest of the book will be just how to become aware of our own basic nature, our true nature. And he explains in that same chapter that different approaches have been taught in the Indian tradition to enter awakening, and that the term mudra was used in many contexts. It was used as Dharma mudra, Samaya mudra, Kama mudra, and Mahamudra, which are actually different ways of entering awakening. And he differentiates them. What is the difference between Dharma mudra and Samaya mudra and Kama mudra? And then what is the specificity of that which was always called Mahamudra? And he gives the key definitions. Okay, what is it? For example, he says, I'm now on page 125, emptiness endowed with the most sublime of manifestations, unchanging bliss, and one taste are called Mahamudra. It is actually Mahamudra is a term covering the empty nature of all phenomena, of all experiences. Empty here means that the nature of what we experience cannot be grasped. And to open up into the ungraspable flow of experience is actually accompanied by joy, by bliss, which is the absence of suffering, because there's no more tension in mind. It is joy. The mind is happy by nature. is joyful by nature. And that joy itself is ungraspable, is empty. And Mahamudra points to that natural, inherent, connate, co-emergent bliss that we are born with. And like this, he goes from, he seems to be, for the uninstructed reader, he seems to be in a lot of technical explanations in this important 5th chapter. But actually, that is a sequence in the way he talks, and he goes deeper and deeper into this subject, into more and more open ways of describing nature of mind. So that at the end of this 5th chapter, we are really inspired. That's what we want to practice. We have the trust, the inspiration, and the confidence to be able to do it. So take your time to study that chapter as well in depth. Meditate on each quotation, like everywhere in the book. Take your time. Don't just read through. Meditate on every line that inspires you. And then, of course, we want to know how to start. Chapter 6 then teaches us the preliminaries. Actually, preliminaries have 2 meanings here. That is the preliminary to every meditation session, which is developing the deep motivation of bodhicitta, directing our mind, giving our mind a direction towards awakening, relaxing the mind. And then there are the specific preliminaries, the famous ones of developing refuge and bodhicitta with the prostrations, the full body prostrations, the 100-syllable mantra of Vajrasattva, purifying all feelings of guilt and shame, or this lack of self-confidence, so that one develops deep confidence in one's own Buddha nature. Then the practice of generosity with the symbolic mandala offering and the Guru Yoga. And after these preliminaries that usually occupy us for a year, 2 years, 3 years, while we already meditate silently, then we begin to understand, to go through this preliminary process of opening very quickly. And we are able to go into this opening, for example, just by reciting the opening prayers, the refuge prayer, the 4 limitless ones. And we during these prayers, we direct ourselves to the refuge. We remember to be daughters and sons of the Buddhas. We wish to share that with all beings, and we enter these 4 limitless qualities of love, compassion, joy, and equanimity. And we are ready to meditate. That then happens very, very quickly and naturally, thanks to the extensive preliminaries before. In the 7th chapter, he says, well, there are various approaches to Mahamudra, and specifically, he wants to have it clear to us that there are different types of practitioners. There are those who definitely need the gradual instructions. There are those who definitely need the immediate pointing out instructions. And most of us can benefit from a mixture of the two. And then he says, well, for those who need the gradual instructions, Chapter 8 and Chapter 9, here are the gradual instructions of Mahamudra for Shamatha and Vipassana. So he repeats the topics of part 1, where he gave the common ground of all Shamatha and Vipassana practices, and now he gives these instructions in the Mahamudra tradition. And we can ourselves see the difference. How is it practiced, actually? And what is same? So these are the gradual instructions. And they are covered in 2 big chapters on Shamatha and Vipassana, 8 and 9. And this is where we left off with our curriculum so far. We were towards the end of the section on Vipassana, on intuitive insight. Huh? Oh yeah, we actually, of course, yes, we went further. We are already in the pointing out instructions, which is chapter 10. Chapter 10 is then, instead of the gradual instructions, is focusing on the other approach of Mahamudra, the pointing out instructions, where you cannot talk about a gradual approach. The idea in the pointing out instruction Mahamudra is that Mahamudra, the nature of mind, awakening, can be realized on the spot, here and now. No preliminaries necessary. The moment the mind opens, that's when Mahamudra shows. So this part of the instructions is identical to the essential Dzogchen instructions, the pointing out instructions of Dzogchen. There's no difference in that. And the Kagyü Mahamudra masters, since the 2nd and 3rd Karmapa, they were all of them, also holders of the Dzogchen transmission. The 3rd Karmapa was a direct holder of the Nyingma lineage, appearing in the refuge tree of the Nyingma tradition, being the central teacher of Longchenpa, the one who clarified the Dzogchen approach for the Nyingma tradition. But since then, all Mahamudra masters of the Kagyü lineage have also received Dzogchen transmission. It was also part of our retreat to receive Dzogchen transmissions from Geno Rinpoche, who was also a Dzogchen master, not only a Mahamudra master. And just like the 3rd Karmapa Rangjung Dorje and all teachers since, he always showed to us the essential identity of these 2 approaches. So in the 10th chapter, then Dagpo Tashi Namgyal describes a set of pointing out instructions. And he does something which is really the work of a genius. He gives a structure to the pointing out instructions that normally don't have a structure, which makes it possible for us to benefit from them more easily. And it makes it easier for teachers to feel, to know just how far they can go with the pointing out instruction with a disciple. Maybe some of you have heard of the Koan training in the Zen tradition. And you have heard maybe that there are easier koans and more difficult koans. That there's a graded approach to these koans, which are all actually opening into the non-conceptual sphere. None of these koans can be resolved intellectually. Now, pointing out instructions in Mahamudra are the koans of Mahamudra. They cannot really be understood intellectually. You can understand the words, but you don't get the meaning. Understanding the meaning shows as an opening of the mind of the disciple before even words can be expressed. And sometimes no words can ever be expressed. But the transformation of the person is obvious. It's maybe interesting for you to make that correspondence, that are pointing out instructions easier to get and others which are more subtle. And you need preceding realizations, preceding understandings to get the point of those deeper pointing out instructions. So in this chapter 10, he first clarifies what is to be understood. The pointing out instructions about the basic, the abiding state of mind, the essential nature of mind. How can mind be described? What means co-emergent? That is actually investigating the question, how can one be stupid and awakened at the same time? This is the idea of co-emergence. But co-emergence goes further. How can one experience something while what one experiences is ungraspable? So it's the co-emergence of empty nature together with all the phenomena of our existence. And what is this meaning, another term for Mahamudra, of the connate union, the co-emergent unity of manifestation and emptiness, bliss and emptiness, clarity and emptiness, awareness and empty nature, all of these aspects of unity? How is that? So he clarifies what needs to be understood, and then he shows with what kind of instructions one points to the nature of mind itself, because some pointing out instructions, they show the mind. Other pointing out instructions, they show the nature of phenomena, of the thinking processes. Showing the nature of appearances, outer appearances, inner thinking processes. Are they same? Are they different? What is the relationship with mind? Mind, outer appearances, inner processes of thinking and feeling. So they're pointing out instructions in all these different areas. And then there are pointing out instructions about how to eliminate flaws, difficulties in one's practice. Pointing out instructions that guide the student back to the essence of practice. What's the real point of practice? So this 10th chapter is a jewel mine of instructions. But please, yes, you might feel now after this over you want to jump into that chapter, because there you might find the real Mahamudra stuff. But you might not be able to understand it because you haven't established the ground. So, in case you don't understand the 10th chapter, please read the preceding 9 and practice them and have the patience to put them into practice, because then you will be sure to understand. A Mahamudra master gives pointing out instructions when she or he feels the time is ripe for that remark. And the remark comes spontaneously. We don't have a register of pointing out instructions in our mind. We draw now this card, we play this card now, and then we play another thing, we play that card. No. The pointing out instructions of a Mahamudra master appear spontaneously because of the difficulty of the student to be in Mahamudra. And then spontaneously, the pointing out comes showing just how simple it could be. And the pointing to the simplicity of how it could be sounds paradoxical to the intellectual mind, because it is not going through the normal intellectual reasoning of intellectual mind that the student could have done himself or herself. It needs a pointing out that goes underneath, that kind of helps the habitual tendencies of the mind to either become obvious or to be seen through. And to find new ways of being. So pointing out instructions, they point to the way of being, of seeing that is a Buddha's mind. That's what they point to. They point to Mahamudra, so how a Mahamudra being experiences reality. They come from that dimension. One cannot become a Mahamudra teacher by reading many books and then playing the good card, making the good comment. This will not be very liberating. Many have tried, but not so successful. And then obviously, chapter 11 gives us an idea of how to sustain Mahamudra once it has arisen. And Dagpo Tashi Namgyal explains why it is necessary to cultivate and sustain Mahamudra. Because here, practitioners like myself and others might think that to have understood is enough, and then get lost again in clinging and not remembering what they have understood. So how can I sustain an insight? How can I cultivate the seeing with the Buddha's eye without entering ego-centered tendencies again? It's a very tricky point. You understand? It's not so easy. It's not done with effort. It's done by a very wise way of using our capacity to remember, sati. This mindfulness that now becomes a remembering of the awareness that one has already contacted. But not bringing in a memory from the past, but remembering just how it was to open up into that awareness. So it's not remembering the result, at least in the beginning. Later on you can remember the result, that's the quickest way. But one remembers the path of opening up. One remembers just how the letting go went. And one lives the letting go another time. So, these are the methods of just how one sustains Mahamudra. And I don't remember if he actually talks about it in that section, but one method, for example, to sustain Mahamudra is to pray. Guru Yoga. It's one of the greatest methods to sustain Mahamudra, because Guru Yoga, prayers of devotion, of confidence, are not intellectual. They open our heart, they bring us in contact with our aspiration, the living example arises in our awareness, and as the Guru unites with us, we let the Guru meditate, and that's the best way to sustain Mahamudra. Then, chapter 12 continues with the same subject of sustaining Mahamudra. It is about eliminating deviations and strayings in meditation, how we can lose ourselves Then the 13th chapter is about how we can enhance the realization. All of these are supplements, supplementary instructions coming from the experience of Mahamudra masters in guiding students. When the student falls ill, physically, when the students have a wrong understanding, develop a lopsided understanding of empty nature, too much empty, overemphasizing some aspect of practice, clinging to rituals, whatever the issue might be. Could also be mental, emotional problems, or dealing with spirits. All of that. Dullness in Mahamudra meditation, agitation in Mahamudra meditation. How to deal with that? Developing Mahamudra in sleep, in the dream state, in deep sleep. The clear light of Mahamudra in deep sleep. All of these are methods to enhance the practice. And again, Dagpo Tashi Namgyal stays with the most essential points. And then finally, chapters 14 and 15, he describes how realization develops. So until then, these have been practical instructions about how to practice and how to sustain the practice. And then he says, well, realization develops, and although one cannot say it exactly happens like that for every practitioner, usually practitioners go through 4 phases in the development of realization. First, they struggle with letting go, and they learn how to relax. This is called one-pointedness, this level of practice. There is a dominance of the Shamatha experience in one-pointedness. Realization is very small, although one cannot say that it is not there, because understanding is deepening and moments of letting go begin to appear. This is the first yoga of one-pointedness. And then, when realization comes to a crucial point of transforming our spontaneous way to relate with situations, then we enter the yoga of simplicity. Simplicity means that in a situation, usually first of all in meditation, but later also in activity, the mind relaxes beyond observer, beyond subject-object. The mind opens up and does not react with the belief in self anymore, a center of experience. So the crucial transformation is that before one already understood non-self, one already understood to a certain degree that clinging to self, to ideas of stability, is the source of tension. One understood, one knew already relaxed state of mind, but now this opens so much that one cannot believe in a self anymore. It feels wrong. And one cannot even re-establish the self that one was believing in before. One cannot bring it back. There's a true realization, one has seen the reality, one cannot bring back the old illusion. It will try to manifest itself. In this phase of practice, it will actually be dominant most of the time. these bhakshaks, these habitual tendencies of emotional clinging, emotional entanglement, they will be present. But one cannot believe oneself. One is angry, and one does not believe one's own anger like before. One has desire, and does not believe one's desire anymore. Something else is in there, is stronger than before. And if one gives way, if one allows this understanding which is already there to manifest itself, this phase of freedom from elaboration will lead into the phase of one taste. And that means one has become very simple in one's approach. One lets go the clinging to appearances very quickly. One taste means that now, more often than not, situations are experienced in their ungraspable nature. And you don't need to tell that to yourself. You don't need to actually remind yourself that phenomena are empty. They are spontaneously, by themselves, appearing as empty in nature. That's very relieving, and one does need to encourage that as well through the smaller one taste, into the middling one taste, into the greater one taste, until this becomes absolutely natural. That almost always the ungraspable yet clear nature of appearances is obvious. And when that becomes so natural and spontaneous that it does not need any encouragement anymore, one enters the final phase of realization, which is called non-meditation. Non-meditation is the same as non-effort. No more cultivation. The word bhavana or gom, bhavana Sanskrit, gom Tibetan, means to cultivate, to give an energy into a certain direction. And when one enters the yoga of non-meditation, the message is one does not need formal meditation practice anymore. One does not cultivate formally insight anymore. The insight becomes really like a wisdom fire. It nourishes itself from all the activities, all the situations during the day, and burns the remaining illusions, the tendencies, the habitual tendencies which pop up in the situations. They are burned without effort in the insight that goes along, that comes along immediately. And this continues until all the habitual tendencies are burned. That means no one believes in them anymore. There's no more fuel into that fire of samsaric confusion. This fire is extinguished. It receives no more support. There's no belief anymore. Nothing. And even in the dream state, even in the deep sleep state, there is no more clinging whatsoever. So all of that becomes then an experience of empty clarity or empty bliss. And that's where one enters Buddhahood. The end of non-meditation is then complete awakening. So, in chapter 14, Dagpo Tashi Namgyal gives us an outline of the 4 yogas. And in chapter 15, he explains how the 4 yogas develop in detail. And he also says at the end of chapter 15 how that could be correlated to the teaching on the 10 bhumis, the Bodhisattva bhumis, sometimes also called the 13 bhumis, including the 2 preliminary ones and Buddhahood, plus the 10 Bodhisattva bhumis. And he relates these 4 yogas of Mahamudra to the 5 paths, the 5 ways of realizing awakening, which are described in the sutras, the Mahayana sutras as well. This chapter is a help for practitioners to have a little orientation with the other texts also used in the tradition, which do not talk about 4 yogas, but about 10 bhumis of 5 paths. But all of that is very clear to Dagpo Tashi Namgyal. We are not talking about a scholarly system where the delimitations between one yoga and the next yoga are absolutely clear. Actually, we describe the development of practitioners. They generally go through these stages. Sometimes there are quicker developments, then they stand still for a while, or that goes slower. Sometimes at certain levels there's still possible to relapse a little bit, to go back into times of confusion until the practice picks up energy again. So aware of all these variations in the development, still it is quite helpful to talk about these 4 ways of practice, which are called the 4 yogas of Mahamudra. And then comes the colophon with the dedication of the author. And closing the frame, the task of presenting Mahamudra in an easily understandable, comprehensive way was accomplished, and bodhicitta and Guru Yoga as the main aspiration of the master writing this book, they manifest in the last sentences, very short. So this was the outline of the book. Introduction, main part, colophon. The main part, the common instructions, common to all schools, the particular instructions to Mahamudra. Both having Shamatha and Vipassana, which should be practiced as a unity. And then here, in the particular instructions on Mahamudra, how to dwell in the unity of Shamatha and Vipassana, how to sustain that insight, how to live in the view of Mahamudra, how to live the insight. And then what comes from that, the difficulties encountered, how one can solve them, and how then the realizations develop. That's the structure of the book. So actually, very simple, very clear, going from the common understanding into the particular approach of Mahamudra, where we also follow a gradual approach, going from the more basic training in mental calm into the insight practice, where the 2 of them unite, and then how to stay in that unity. And that's it. And then if you have that structure, if you know that structure, and if you need first to read through the book once, and then you read it a second time. And then perhaps you can open it any place and you know where you are and what Dagpo Tashi Namgyal is right here talking about. Because you feel, oh yeah, that corresponds to my experience. I started out with this common way of practice. I heard some pointing out instructions. Yes, and actually that helped me with that, and that with that, and all of that makes sense to you. And you feel at home. and you feel that these descriptions, with their structure, they are simply describing what you live. This is how it feels to me. Although it sounds intellectual, I have the feeling that Dagpo Tashi Namgyal talks from the beginning to end from direct experience. That is actually just describing the home of all the Buddhas, guiding us through, finding a way to describe them.